So I want to welcome everybody to our second in this academic year's Leadership Matters webinar series. And I want to thank you for coming and joining us. This series was designed about 3 years ago, intending to kind of bring people together to talk about something that I think we all believe is very important. But I know I don't think there's any alternative to it in creating a better world, and that is good leadership. And as we begin, I think about some terms that are sometimes used. And the term, for instance, leadership, like communications and other terms, is a soft skill. And I often wonder about that. And I think to myself, a soft skill, if it's such a soft skill, why is it so hard for people to demonstrate good leadership? Why is it so difficult for people to understand that the whole concept of leadership is dealing with other people, not focusing so much on ourselves? And that is a challenge. And it's not a challenge, as many of us here today, that is resident in today's world. It's not. This is something that has been going on for many, many years, centuries, in fact. And the problem is, as we teach and we study the subject of leadership, the topic is essentially one that says, can you find people and can you explain to people and teach people that it's not about them, it's about everybody else? And that's what great leaders do. They think they basically are influencers, yes, but they influence people for the right reasons. And they basically essentially say, it's not about me, it's not about what's good for me, it's what's good for society as a whole. And that's what we're facing today, as we faced many, many times in our nation's history, in global history. And that is the biggest challenge we have, is understanding that it's about the greater good. And today we're gonna have a discussion about leadership and the role of leadership. I'm very excited about this because I'm kind of interested to hear about what is the secret sauce for activating rapid disruptive change leadership. It's a subject that is very, very important today and has been important for many years. And so with that, what we'd like to do, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. And to do that, we have our very own Dr. Teresa Good, who has been with our program for over a decade. She's very well known in our program. She's a tremendous leadership instructor, extremely well liked by all of our faculty at CPS and by our students. And to do the honor of introducing our guest speaker, Teresa, would you please do that for us?
I am happy to do this, and I'm very happy that I joined this. I was able to get in just in time. So I am happy and honored to introduce to Danyale. I think for all of you who had an opportunity to check out the brief description that Danyale provided for her background and maybe did any additional research, you know that Danyale is really a terrific person and the perfect person to be doing our webinar today. Just briefly, some of the impressive things about her background. First of all, she's a double Husky. She has a master's in leadership, and she also has her doctorate in organizational learning, both from Northeastern. So that's very impressive. In addition, she's won numerous awards. She earned an Emerging Scholars Award from the International Leadership Association. She got an Academic Excellence Award from Northeastern as part of her doctoral program. And she's got numerous recognitions from her corporate experience, which is vast also. She's got lots of experience in the corporate world. And as you may know, now she's got her own organization. And just a little bit about my personal experience with Danyale. Danyale was a student in one of my classes. And, I remember Danyale, we met before graduation in person, and she talked to me a little bit about her goals and what she wanted to do. And I was impressed while she was in class and when I had a chance to meet her in person, is that she's somebody who really models a lot of what we talk about in the leadership program, and I'm sure it's the same in the doctoral program. And in particular, I was impressed by her vision, by her clear sense of what she wanted to do and where she wanted to go, and by the action she consistently took to help achieve that her goals. And so that's why I was so happy to see her presentation that she gave for the Global Leadership Forum. over the summer, and it was a terrific presentation. And Sriram and I both thought Danyale for our Leadership Matters webinar because it's a perfect hit. So I think you're going to really enjoy the presentation. Danyale is going to be talking about her research that informed her doctoral study and a lot of publications that she's had. So as I said, I am very happy and pleased to introduce Danyale and to learn even more about the secret sauce for activating rapid disruptive change leadership, which we as leaders are all dealing with right now. So Danyale, you now officially have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Welcome.
Good. I am so excited to be here. Thank you, Les, and all of our faculty from Northeastern. It is an honor to be, as I shared coming onto the call, home. This is home. I am a double Husky, and so it's an honor to come back home and to just share what all I have been doing in the research that I found and how we look to really empower and activate leaders, which is what our topic is today. The secret sauce of activating rapid disruptional change leadership. Very briefly, I am joining from Washington, D.C., and I just wanted to share, I appreciated that opening. I know some people like to hear numbers a little bit, so I wanted to give a few bit of numbers and stats about my background to give you just some context setting of where I'm coming from on this topic. So over 20 years of a career working in organizational transformation. My portfolio has been over $100 million in terms of transformational efforts, over 200 different types of enterprise-wide change projects. Because I've worked both in the public sector and the private sector, I've been fortunate enough for my work to influence over 150 million customers. 160,000 employees been impacted and touched by the enterprise work that I've done. I've been fortunate to customize and train over 270 leaders across the spectrum of executive to entry-level leaders around the topic of change management, and I've worked across 7 different industry sectors. So coming to this topic, knowing a little bit about organizational transformation and change. With that, let's talk about our time together. So we're going to start out by talking about the rapid disruptional change context as some grounding. Then we're going to lead in and focus on you, talking about our high-performing leaders, our next-gen leaders, as that's the focus of today's topic. I am going to provide a brief overview of my research study that led into the emergence of a model that I truly believe is the secret sauce around disruptional change, a relational model. We'll go briefly over a scenario example, then we'll open up for thoughts, questions, and comments, and we'll wrap up with, do some wrap up and self-reflection. As we're moving through, I would ask if you have questions, please feel free to drop those questions into the chat, and we and the team will be monitoring chat, and we will open up and address those questions during our Q&A portion. With that, all right, let's dig in a little bit more. One other housekeeping. In terms of session objectives, I truly hope that coming out of this session that you do feel activated, you do feel empowered, but I also that you come away with some key takeaways that you can apply, adaptive techniques that you can apply to your leadership and to your fellowship that can help even deepening the relationships that you have in your organization. So that's the first piece, kind of objective I hope you receive out of this. And then secondly, I believe leadership, as Dr. Stein was saying earlier, leadership is a process. Leadership is a social process. It's about continuing to evolve as leaders. So I'm hoping that through this, there's always opportunities for growth. And maybe through our discussion today, there'll be some growth gaps that may be uncovered that you can grab a hold to, that you want to work towards and strengthen to help to just continue to thrive in your organizations around effectiveness and organizational quality. So let's talk about rapid disruptional change. When we hear the topic of disruption, it's often associated with the technology boom, and then the words disruption comes after it. Or right now, the discussion around AI. AI is the topic of the hour and how we're integrating AI in different mechanisms and capacities. And so we also often think of that as disruption. I'm going to ask you to put that to the side for a moment, because when we talk about rapid disruptional change, which I believe is the next normal, this is really coming from McCain, Selsky, and Lee's study back in the early 2000s. They really coined this phrase that I'm picking up on. And what they said is that rapid disruptional change is about a radical interruption to the organization's operations. That radical interruption can come as a result of market demands. It can come as a result of the environment and innovation. But that radical interruption can do a couple of things. One, they argued it creates shocks in the organization that can help destabilize the performance of the organization. The other component to this is because there is this radical interruption that's happening, there's a higher relevance and almost expectancy that's placed on next gen high performing leaders, because you're the ones that have to implement those innovative strategies to respond to that interruption and then therefore pivot and move. And so because of that, that demand even becomes greater. As I've been looking and evaluating rapid disruptional change, I've taken the conversation a little bit further from my research, where I believe those shock waves, they can destabilize, but I really think there's an opportunity to propel innovation, propel thriving if we do something very critical, which is address the relational dynamics between leaders and followers and what it takes to necessitate that relationship to move the organization through disruption. With that, we're going to go one step further. So when we talk about disruption as well, rapid disruptional change, it is triggered by some type of contextual moments. And as you'll see, I've listed some that we all have experienced or know of in our organization, everything from customer centricity demands to reimagining the future, administrative and political mandates if you're in the philanthropic area or in the government sector, global expansion, or even digital transformation. So what happens with these contextual moments, they create that trigger point for disruption. And in the process of doing so, what happens is that organizations and executive leaders have to think about what is that critical why, that critical sense of urgency that I need to articulate related to this contextual moment to help to describe why we are moving in the direction that we are in terms of the transformation. I want to give a quick example around customer centricity and what I'm really getting at here. When I was leading an organizational change division at United Airlines, one of the things that United was facing at the time was a decrease in customer satisfaction scores around the customer's experience with the airline. And so what happens, there came this focus around customer centricity and customer centricity demands that resulted in an action of restructuring the whole operations division of 55,000 employees, so that the operations of the organization would now be tied to the customer experience from the moment a customer makes a reservation all the way to picking up their bag at their final destination. With that one structural reorg to align with the customer-centric demands, there were a series of other changes that were associated with that: process change, technology change, people change that was interrupting, creating them shockwaves within the organization. So what happened? So as a result of the reorg, as a result of all of those shocks that were happening, restructuring the way people worked, how they approached the work, we did reach the goal of increasing satisfaction around customer centricity and customer demands. That occurred, but also the way in which the organization operated got to a greater level of effectiveness and efficiency. Why is this all important, or why am I bringing this up? Because when you're wearing a change leadership hat and you're looking at driving change strategies that are in rapid disruptional change, that are triggered by these moments, it is going to be the differentiator in that transformation being sustainable. It is also going to be critical because as leaders, new moments create new demands for how you show up in your leadership role, how do you respond, and how you activate your change leadership, which takes us to now turning to you. So when leadership happens and we talk about change leadership, leaders wear multiple hats when it comes to change leadership. It's a requirement, it's a need, it's a demand, because change is an individual process, and each individual is going to go through the change process at their own pace and at their own rate and demand. And because of that, leaders have to step in and wear different functions. And I am showing on screen the ProSci change leaders model called the Clark model. It's a great model. If you're not familiar with ProSci, they're one of the leading organizations around change methodology. And they bring both the science and the research and the practice into all of their materials and methodologies around change. This is their people leaders model that they use in terms of change leadership that I've adapted in the organizations that I've supported. And it goes like this. Leaders wear the hat as communicators. You're delivering messages, those key messages about the change. Leaders are liaisons. They are working with the project team, the leadership, the change leadership team, giving the pulse of what's happening around the change. They are advocates. Hopefully, they're demonstrating advocacy and support for the change. They're resistance managers. They are working with their teams and they're looking at what are those triggers of resistance that may pop up that could stall an individual from moving into adaptation and moving forward. So they do that. They're also a coach, and they're coaching their teams along with the change. But I added also two other elements: a cultural guardian. Culture is so critical for sustainability, for transformation to actually become not the flavor of the month, but actually stick in the organization. But culture is key. Culture, those patterns of behaviors that happen, both that are spoken and unspoken, that are really the rhythm of the organization, it's crucial. It can be the determining factor of how change moves forward or whether it stalls. And as leaders, we're often those guardians of the culture. We're either helping to push it forward through with our teams and employees. We're sometimes shifting the culture as a process, but that is critical for your change leadership. The last component I'm going to talk about is being a motivator, because when you're talking about transformation and change leadership, you're talking about moving people from one point to another. That's behavioral change. And in order to do that, you somehow have to get in and understand both the intrinsic and extrinsic motivators that'll help move people into adoption. These are the hats of change leadership. The final component in turning and just talking about leaders for a moment that I also feel is very critical is acknowledging where you are, your feelings about the particular change that is occurring. Why is that important? Because in order for you to activate your change leadership, to be effective in change leadership, you first have to move yourself through the change in order to move your team through the change. And sometimes those things are happening in parallel. And oftentimes what has happened when I've sat in a room with executives and advisors, executive leadership tends to forget that leaders too are experiencing the change for themselves, and you have to give them the chance to consume it. What you see on this slide are some sentiments that I have heard working with different leaders, and some sentiments that I have experienced myself when changes happen. If any of these resonate with any of you, please drop an emoji into the chat that I'm not alone in capturing this. But you have a range of feelings that you experience as a leader, from, hey, this change is happening, but oh, wait, I don't have time to even think about how I feel about it. Or the ask of the change are coming continuous to you and your team. And it's like, enough already? Like, really? Or it could be the opposite end of the spectrum, where you're super excited about the new opportunity for you to shine or for your team to shine, and you're excited. Or it could be the total other end, where you're just tired. But the key and the power in this is, by acknowledging where you are in the change process, you create a place of authenticity that can then transfer when you are working with your teams to actually move them through their feelings regarding the change and move them into adoption. This is so critical and key, and leads us into our next topic, which is around my research and how I got started and why focusing on this. So as a change expert and focusing on adaptation, focusing on the people side of change, there were things that came up for me. The rapid disruption or change context, which we talked about as that next normal, that continuous interruption in operation. But there were a couple other facets. There's a pending generational transition. So more and more millennials, right now they're individuals that are ranging between 46 and 24, are stepping into greater roles, or anticipated to step into greater roles of leadership, executive leadership in organizations. Why that was a trigger for me is because our previous generation, our Generation Zs, our baby boomers, who are already in executive positions, have been struggling slightly. We've even seen this during COVID, of how to rally the employees and teams around common purpose and vision in organizational change. And so with a new generational cohort coming on that has a tradition of different workplace characteristics than their previous predecessors, it gave me ooh, there's something in here. The last component was around compounding identities. So again, we got multiple, up to 5 generations now in the workforce that have all different social and context for their particular cohort that impacts their views on a range of things around disruption, everything from technology to thoughts on agility to team management, commitment. All of that is compounding. So with those 3 components, change, a generational transition, multi-generational followers, and compounded identities, the questions that came up for me that grounded my research was, okay, in the leader-follower relationship, and when that emerges with millennials in executive positions, multi-gen followers, and their teams, how is that relationship going to evolve or emerge and to establish during disruptive times in building adaptive capacity? What does that look like? And the subset of that is, in the process of that relationship, is there the idea of co-production or co-producing going to arise, co-production fellowship going to emerge? I did all of my research on from the lens of the follower. Because again, I'm a transformational leader. It's all about the people. And so I wanted to use fellowship theory as the lens. And for those that may not be familiar with fellowship or follower, or hear fellowship theory, followers in this instance is not talking about the number of people that are on your Instagram feed. This is really talking about followers are really talking about individuals that are working in concert with the leader in that relational exchange that is happening, that provides more, in a lot of ways, legitimacy to the role of the leader. And so fellowship theory, it was the lens that I used, and I'm going to move forward in the interest of time. So when it came to kind of the conclusions of my study, the good news was that there was some evidence from the research that says, when millennials, leaders, and multi-gender followers in their relational exchange, adaptive capacity can be established and is established in 3 ways. 1, by designating action-oriented purposes. So purpose tied to actions. It serves as a grounding, activating deeper levels of emotional intelligence by matching the disruptive moment with intentionality. So the use of intentionality comes in critical for established adaptive capacity. And then the second point, is co-production happening in the relationship? Yes, it is. It does transpire, co-production does happen, and it happens as leaders and followers are co-producing an evolved leadership culture. So the leadership culture is evolving. And then the last piece is around co-creating a stabilizing environment. So with that came the next piece, and where we're going to spend the remainder of our time, and that is going to be sharing about all of that research there. What came about was some patterns of the behaviors actually emerged that through the research that demonstrated to me that if these facets were continually activated, that adaptive capacity could occur. And the four facets are this, and we'll go by one-on-one, but more deeply or briefly. But the first one is be intentional. So be intentional. Leaders, followers acting with intentionality. If they do that, they can tap adaptive capacity. The second facet, designated action-oriented purposes. This is just talking about purpose as a grounding point during disruption that's linked to action. That's the second facet that can lead to adaptive capacity. The third facet is activating emotional intelligence. This is really moving into looking and tapping into the heart of one another. And in doing so, you can activate adaptive capacity. The last piece was around co-creating the stabilizing environment, leaders and followers working together jointly to build the environment to stabilize employees. And then the final piece in the center of it is what emerged is courageous followership. So courage comes forward during rapid disruptional change in this context that supported adaptive capacity. So let's move very quickly. We're going to move to each component of the model. So facet one, being intentional. So next gen leaders, as we said, leaders and followers, they are thinking strategically. They're really looking at taking intentional steps that move both behavior and communications forward into a space of adaptive capacity. And so because we're talking about this facet, we're talking about moving behaviors, moving individuals into an adaptive place. The behavior aligned to this facet is acting with intent. And so you'll see some coaching questions up here, just these pieces for you to think about. Where or how are you bringing intentionality into your interactions as a leader? The next facet, designated action-oriented purposes. This was really fascinating and really and throughout the research from the experience from my research, in that when a purpose was defined for the followers, the purpose provided a grounding, something folks could rally behind. But when that purpose is linked to action, what they needed to do, that shifted them into the point of moving forward and adapting in the moment rather than resisting against it. So in this facet, your behavior pattern is acting with a sense of purpose in mind. And this can be triggered again around intrinsic and extrinsic motivators, or can be a key component as you're thinking about this from your own self in your own leadership. The third facet, as we talked about, was activating emotional intelligence. This, and I purposely use a heart here because this is really about seeing and hearing one another's leaders, seeing and hearing and understanding their followers, followers hearing and seeing and understanding their leaders at their emotional core. So where you're understanding how emotions and you're utilizing emotions in an intelligent way to navigate through that disruptive moment. And particularly from a behavior standpoint, is being conscious and in tune with one's emotions. So from an emotional intelligence perspective, this is dealing with self-regulation, self-awareness, or even empathy. The last facet, or the fourth facet, co-creating a stabilizing environment. And this facet is really about the collective, leader and follower really coming together and co-creating what they believe needs to be the match to the disruptive moment. So together, thinking about what and creating what is needed in order to move us to this next step in the disruptive moment. And the key from a behavior standpoint here is making things feel steady. What we know from an organizational change perspective is if you can get the individuals to see themselves in the change, to see the why, but to see themselves in that future state, you can move their behavior into adaptation, move them into adoption. And the same is true at this facet of co-creating, getting the two leaders and followers co-creating together. The same effect happens for adaptive capacity. And then finally, the center, courageous fellowship. Courageous fellowship, this is a phrase in a way of thinking and operating that Irish Shalev, who is the father, I call him the father, but he's really one of the grounding theorists in fellowship. And he talks about the notion of fellowship theory that's grounded in courage, courageous fellowship that's grounded in courage, integrity, responsibility, sense of service, and responsibility. And power, I'm sorry. But particularly with this, courage comes and emerges within when disruption is happening. When rapid disruption is happening, there are moments, courageous moments that happens where leaders and followers step in and step out in ways they would not have traditionally have done. And that brings us to the premise of our of the model. I want to just go into a brief example of how this plays out and then go into opening up for questions as I keep an eye on time. So for applying this model, like all of these facets, how does this work in a scenario? I just want to pull out the scenario around workplace hybrid disruption, because this is something that many organizations have been experiencing and are still experiencing post-COVID-19, where they're trying to get back to some sense of normal. And they're looking back to the old ways of working while embracing that the current disruptive moment has changed and shifted. And in this example around workplace hybrid disruption, I'm going to have us just home in onto this around relationships and connections, where if we were sitting in this, the ask of us as leaders is to work with our teams in building and fostering greater relationships within the teams, focusing on team action planning. So what does this look like if you were to use the model? So we're asked to focus on making and building and fostering relationships in the team as a priority. Utilizing a model, it would go something like this. Being intentional is the first facet. In your change leadership and activating your change leadership, this is really in a place of first self-reflection to say, what are intentional actions that I can take with my team to launch this change? Then you go into a place of action where it could be holding a team discussion on what this building and fostering relationships look like. If we go into designated action-oriented purpose, where you're looking at purpose linked to action, the self-reflection that you could have is, how can I ground my team with a purpose linked to action for this change effort of building and fostering greater relationships in hybrid environment? You can ask your team to document and share relationship wins that they're making across the organizations to support the work. You could give them special badges to award collaboration, partnership, active listening. You see where I'm going with this in terms of reflecting on the facet and kind of the thinking behind it, doing your self-reflection as a leader, and then taking action. Activating emotional intelligence, again, being in tune. You're looking at reflecting within yourself, how can I be in tune with my team's needs? so that they're feeling seen and also feeling heard. You could do this. One action you could take is by being open and transparent yourself, sharing what you're feeling, going back to what we were saying earlier around leaders being in tune with how you feel, because that authenticity and that place in authenticity can help your teams move through the change. So same thing here, being open and transparent in sharing on your experience, you can then open up the space for them to share how they're feeling about the change. Last two components around this example of building and fostering relationships. With the facet of co-creating a stabilizing environment, your self-reflection is, how do I balance the various reaction of my teams, especially if there's resistance? One action, you can establish a masterclass. Setting a masterclass setting where you build in different relationship scenarios into a meeting. They're described, your team brainstorms, you use peer coaching or role playing, all to help them in co-creating what that looks like. And then the last piece and component in terms of the courageous fellowship or the courage factor, I double starred action number 2 in emotional intelligence, because being open and transparent to share how you're feeling is a courageous moment. And that is a courageous factor. So if you stepping into that, you are stepping into that place of courageousness, both as a leader and even if you're sharing that with your leadership in terms of fellowship. So with that, I am going to pause and open up time. I know I've spoken quite a bit there, but wanted to open up now for questions, comments, discussions. So I will open up the floor to my Northeastern colleagues. I think, Les, you're going to kick us off with some questions, if there are questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hawkins. That was really, no, and I'm not, I have a policy. If I don't have something good to say, I just don't say anything. But so I'm going to say something really good because I mean it. That was really a motivating presentation, because number one, it addresses so many of the things that we teach in our program. Number two, it is so practical. It's so relatable for us. We can, as human beings and as leaders and as people in academia, of course, in this situation, and students who are studying the whole, in a variety of different fields, so much of this is so applicable. So I encourage, our listeners and our participants, please put some ideas in the chat box, and we will definitely get to them, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we possibly can. But in the meantime, let me ask you something.
Sure.
As you were providing our examples and as you were laying out your foundations, the 4 concepts that you were specifically discussing, yes, something just hit me. And I was thinking about how this all relates to 2 things that happened to the same company, Southwest Airlines. I was thinking back to the 2001. Most of you can people say sort of like for the older folks of us, the folks that remember the assassination of John F. Kennedy, you can remember what was happening when 9/11, September 11, 2001 happened. You knew where you were, what was going on when you first heard about that catastrophic event. Afterwards, of course, people were trying to sort through everything. Southwest Airlines was a very interesting case under the leadership of a gentleman by the name of James Parker, who has since left and gone on. Of course, everything was grounded, and Southwest Airlines found itself in a variety of different locations, and they cater mostly to the United States, not globally, but within the United States, they found themselves in a variety of, everywhere in the country. Parker gave all of his pilots, first officers, and attendants the authorization to take care of the passengers. And he said, they are our most important customer. They are the most important people we have to deal with. They are our customers. And so they did things like take people bowling. They did things like take them, to different takeout food. I mean, they just made them feel comfortable knowing that, hey, these people need to be taken care of while before we can get back in the air and do our job. Now, that's issue number 1. Number 2, last summer, about a year ago, a little over a year ago, Southwest Airlines, we're having weather conditions, we're having all kinds of issues going on. The airlines we had multiple cancellations, but the worst, because of the conditions, again, disruptive change, the worst was Southwest Airlines. They took a beating. They couldn't get it right. They simply could not get it right. And everything they were doing, they canceled more flights than any other airline. They had more errors in luggage issues. Now, the question, the CEO, second time, is a gentleman by the name of Bob Jordan, who's still the CEO and has been apologizing for all of that ever since. Now, what do you think, related to everything you've just said, relative to disruptive change, and what are the differences between, generally, I mean, without getting into we don't know we haven't studied it in detail, but specifically, what would be the difference between the leadership styles of two people, a guy named Parker and a guy named Jordan? What would make the difference that an airline that was touted to be so friendly to the customers and understanding them, that emotional intelligence that they had, the relationship with their customers, they knew who they were and what they were dealing with, what would cause things to change 22 or 3 years later? It has to be, to me, it has to be a leadership has to be a part of it. So what do you think is the difference between one and the other? Why would one transition to what happened under those circumstances? What could be the difference?
So there's two things that are coming up for me relative to that. I'm going to actually, if I can go back the other way, I'm going to pull up my model for 1 second, the full model, so you can see it. A couple of things are coming to mind with that. The first one is not necessarily related to the leaders themselves, but to the organization, but the leaders being the helm, culture. So culture, and one of the things that I'm seeing more and more in organizations, and particularly within the airline industry, given that I have some years working for one of their big competitors, it's about culture. So when we talk about culture, we're talking about those norms of behaviors that are happening within the organization. But the distinction that I like to make about culture is there's a such thing as called counterculture. So there's things that we espouse to do. We espouse to be the organization of choice. We espouse to have entrepreneurial spirit in our organization. That's what we're espousing as a value. But the reality may be what's being rewarded and what's being acknowledged is the opposite of what we're espousing. And because of that, a counterculture is being created. And when you're trying to move change forward and move an organization forward, and you have counterculture going on, there's a disconnect. So internally, the employees are not on board with what is actually happening because the environment, the systems, the processes that are put in place are counter to what's being asked. So the question that comes up for me about Southwest in that period, what was happening internally, culturally? Because between those two leaders, and the culture of Southwest is definitely from internal, from what I know of the organization, is one that is very empowering to the employee. I'm beginning to wonder what happened culturally that may have brought some disconnects that then were transferred to operationally what was happening in the organization. So that's one piece that's coming up for me, is about culture. The other piece is just looking back at my model that made me want to question and wonder from the leaders, where was their intentionality focus? Was the intentionality of the leader? What was the focus on that? Where was the leader being intentional? Was it around operations? Was it around service? What was that intentionality focus linking back to the culture? Was there a link? Was there a disconnect? How was that showing up? Because that then in turn is going to be the trigger of how the organization and people are responding. So I think about these facets, what you're questioning, the same thing. Where was the intentionality between both of the leaders? Where was that emotional intelligence, meaning with their leadership team, with their executive leadership team, all the way down in the organization? Were people in tune of actually what was happening in terms of the emotions of staff and how those emotions were being used that trickled into behavior? So we could go around this. At one point, Southwest was also an airline where they got a lot of their ideas in their innovation came from their employees. That was early days of Southwest. I'm wondering, is that co-creation, and I'm talking about it's co-creation to stabilizing your internal environment, was any co-creation happening? Did they shift away and move away from that model? And if they did, that would cause the turbulence and it shift as well. And then the last thing, just talking through all my facets here, around action-oriented purpose, what was that rallying point? What was that rallying purpose or point in the organization? Was there one? Was there one to ground in employees, ground leadership, ground the operations, or did that shift?
Good point. Very good. Let me shift. That was great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I can see it always relating to that leadership question. It always relates back to the leadership, because what you said, when the culture, I always challenge my students, find a good organization with a bad, a great leader and a bad culture, or a great culture and a bad leader, and you're not gonna find that. There's a direct relationship between the two, and that's what we bring out. A question here from Dorian. And Dorian, if I don't get this right, just chime in, just get in there. But she said, when it may mean a shift in how a leader's group may be structured, or it is not favorable for that group in the short term, is there a way to paint the future state in a positive light, even if it's not?
So you said Dorian asked that question?
Oh, yeah,
so
yes.
Dorian, I'm from the school of, in my change management career, I'm all about transparency. If something is ugly, say it's ugly. If it's beautiful, say it's beautiful. Because you're talking about individuals, you're talking about moving behavior. And the trend that I see and what I value as a change leader is authenticity. And what people and employees want to hear in their organization is the real deal. Give me the authentic, transparent, open answer, and then I can respond accordingly and I can move my behavior in the direction that needs to be moved. Now, sometimes you're going to resist and they're going to halt. A lot of times you're going to do that. But more often than not, people are going to shift and move into adoption. So here's the key. If the picture is ugly and the future is not bright, or it's not rosy red, you need to articulate that. But this is what you do. In telling a story, you talk about, things are not going to be easy. This is the future. Things are not going to be easy. It's not going to feel good. You're going to be uncomfortable in this future in the beginning. However, we are going to equip you with the tools, the resources, and the things that you need to navigate through to this future moment, in this future opportunity. And it may not, and it's not going to be easy, but we're here to put the systems and the supports in place to help you to get there. So I think the key is always to be authentic. If it's not pretty and it's not going to be easy, say that, but say it in a way that doesn't keep people stuck in that moment. You want to move them. So you have to talk about the things that you're going to put them in place to move them forward. And also in the story that you're sharing, saying that it's not always going to be this way. And you know why it's not always going to be this way? Because I am looking to you as my co-partner and co-producer to help to collectively establish how we can make this future work for us. So that's the other piece of it too, is getting them on board in creating and co-creating in ways that you can. And there's always ways to co-create, even if it's small ways, in small digestible ways that can empower them to move forward. So that is the rule that I have taken in the organizations, large organizations that I've served, when changes have not, weren't going to yield such a positive woo from staff, but I wanted to get them the real. And what happens as a result of doing that, I can tell you, employees appreciate authenticity and honesty, because you didn't sugarcoat it. You didn't throw me a line. You didn't give me some story that was distant from reality. You gave me the real choice that allows me then to lean in and step in new ways. And when you're a leader and you're change leadership, the key is how you activate that, and you can activate it. I hope that helps.
Fantastic. Yeah, Dorian seemed to appreciate that. She said, "Wonderful, thank you." I don't think we have too much more time because you had asked earlier if you could do a summary. So I want to make sure you have time. But we do have a question from one of our own, Dr. Nancy Polishin, who says, does an organization reward courageous cultures, a courageous culture? How do you reward that? How do you demonstrate that you appreciate that?
So it's interesting because that is something that I think a lot of organizations are still struggling with. But I think when we talked about individual leaders, how as individual leaders, how we begin, you reward the behavior by acknowledging the behavior.
Right.
And you're acknowledging what is done right, what is done well, what is moving in the right direction. You celebrate it. And
Right.
you celebrate it and you highlight that in the organization, and it gives people the opportunity, one, to see what the work that they're doing being acknowledged and celebrated, but two, it also creates a model of which to start to follow. So as leaders, we have to start to doing that it's one leader, I always say change happens one project at a time, one team at a time, one leader at a time. And it's the same way in this instance. Celebrating courageous leadership, courageous followership starts with us as individual leaders on our team, and then articulating that and how that has worked well in our team and how we see behavior and empowerment happen, and articulating that up the chain. And that starts to create a trickle effect as to why to celebrate courageous followership and leadership. And that's how you get them on board.
That's a very good answer, and it reflects on the discussion about an emotional intelligence quotient and what it is, because that relates directly to the individual, the leader's emotional intelligence capability and understanding, and relating to their followers, which again is so important. One last question, and then I'm going to ask you to follow on with your closing remarks. I think because I want to make sure we give you that as you had asked for. And it comes from Shengnan Wu, and it says, "Thanks for the excellent sharing. I really like the idea about followership theory. I just learned situational leadership at my first quarter at Northeastern, which is also follower-centered theory. Could you kindly explain the key difference between the two concepts?"
I think the difference, well, they're actually intertwined. So situational leadership is really saying in the moment, like I'm talking about moment to moment, in the moment, you are altering how you respond, your leadership style, how you respond based upon the moments that you're in and the dynamics that are happening in that moment. So you're adapting. This is where you are moving into agility in your leadership. When you are in the space of situational leadership, fellowship is looking at, and that's as the leader. Fellowship theory is really looking at how the leader and the follower are interacting with one another, and how they're engaging with one another in their relational dynamics. And I would have to say that leadership, when you're talking about fellowship, a leader, and I found this in my research, a leader at any moment, we all can flip and be the follower. And the follower can step into the role as a leadership. So it's not about title, and it's not about position. It's about the relational exchange that is happening where leaders and followers shift back and forth in a relationship. And quite honestly, that's what we want to happen, and what I would encourage us as leaders and activate you towards learning how to lean in and shifting and doing that. Because when you do, it will empower your organization and empower your teams to move through disruption and move transformation to a whole nother level. And with that,
go ahead.
my last piece to say, So when we get back to our topic was the secret sauce of activating rapid disruptional change. What is the secret sauce? I believe that the secret sauce is really outlined in what I talked about in my model, and it's 4 areas. 1, act intently. 2, act with a sense of purpose. Tap your purpose, link that to action, allow that to be a grounding place for your teams. Be conscious. Number 3, be conscious and in tune, 1, with yourself, because again, you can't lead your teams through transformation or rapid disruptional change without also leading yourself. So being conscious and in tune with one's emotions, being seen and heard, making sure you're being seen and heard as leaders and followers. The 4th piece, try to make things feel steady amid the chaos. Co-create that stabilizing environment. In order to do that, leaders and followers have to work together. And the last piece I would say about activating your change leadership, be courageous. We're in a moment where courage in leadership and courage in fellowship, I feel, is a necessity in order to move organizations, in order to tap the talent of our next gen and high-performing leaders to new levels in the space of the next norm, but a rapid disruption or change is vital. And that is all for me. Here's my info. Would love to stay connected with folks. If you want to reach out, you can find me on LinkedIn. Please reach out on LinkedIn, send me a DM, or hit my website, DanyaleHawkins.com. I got a newsletter that's going to be coming out soon. If you want more of this deeper thinking, future coaching materials, it's going to be coming later this late spring and early summer. So please stay connected. If you have new ideas, thoughts, would love to hear from you and engage. Thank you so much, Northeastern. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Hawkins. That was a very inspiring, very dynamic presentation, one that on behalf of everyone here and the rest of the community, we thank you so much. And it's obvious you not only have the knowledge, but you have the passion. And I think that's what brings people together, is when they know that someone says something coming from the heart and they care, the amount of research you do for the subject, and then the way you present it and the way you talk about it. So it's very inspiring. It's just very motivating, to be honest. So I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. It was a wonderful presentation, one that I think many of us we just really appreciate the time and and what you provided us. And so with that, I will say thank you, everybody, for being with us. I appreciate your attendance, and our next presentation, or our final one for the year, will be sometime in May, I believe, but we'll advertise that as best as we can. And it'll be something along the lines of the relationship between leadership and artificial intelligence. And if there's a subject today that is really out there and is getting a lot of attention, that's probably one of them. Really, thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next one. And with that, have a wonderful rest of the week and a great coming weekend. Take care, everybody. It's great seeing you all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you, Danielle.